Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for this panel, which launches our Iraq conference, which actually takes place tomorrow. All day here, we're going to have debates on Iraq in transition, the future of Iraq, issues that are very, very timely. And all this is part of the Iraq initiative here at Chatham House, a project that we started a little while ago that is picking up momentum quite significantly. And as you can imagine, could not have been more timely, especially in light of the challenges that Iraq is facing today. I just want to point out that my colleague, Dr. Rinad Mansour, is the leader of the Iraq initiative, and we're very fortunate to have a number of supporters for this initiative who we thank for their work, including most prominently Crescent Petroleum and Nahrain Network. Thank you so much for supporting this initiative. And I just want to introduce myself. My name is Lina Khatib. I'm the head of the Middle East and North Africa program here at Chatham House that houses the Iraq initiative. Tonight's event, as some of you may have seen, was meant to feature former Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi of Iraq. However, unfortunately, his visa got delayed and he couldn't join us tonight. However, we are extremely fortunate to have an illustrious panel here with us tonight. I honestly couldn't think of a better lineup representing the breadth of the political landscape of Iraq to address the critical issues happening in the country today. Tonight's event, as you can see, is being live streamed. It is on the record, so feel free to tweet as much as you like, but please keep your phones on silent. There are two hashtags that you can use. One is Chatham House Events, which is CH Events, and the other one is hashtag Iraq Initiative. Feel free to tweet throughout, as I said. And I will start the discussion with questions to my guests and then open it up for questions from the audience. So to introduce this really illustrious panel, to my immediate left, we're fortunate to have Dr. Laith Kubba, who is currently the senior advisor to the Prime Minister of Iraq. To his left, we have Mr. Diya al-Asadi, who is the political representative to Mr. Muqtada al-Sadr in Iraq, and he's also the chairman of the political board of Al-Ahrar bloc in Parliament. And last but not least, we have His Excellency Karim Sinjari. Mr. Sinjari is the former Minister of Interior in the Kurdistan region of Iraq and currently advisor to the President of the Kurdistan region. For those of you in the audience who may not understand English, we have headsets. رح أحكي بس بالعربي. إذا حدا ما بيفهم إنجليزي في عنا headsets للترجمة. The event is being simultaneously translated. Interestingly, I don't see anyone in the audience using headsets, so you may not need them. Just to point out that Mr. Sinjari will be speaking in Arabic, so some people might want to use their headsets for that. And also, I just wanted to say that afterwards, we have a reception upstairs in our reception room that you will see just on your way up. And you're all very welcome to join us for a drink after this discussion. So without further ado, of course, we're holding tonight's event as the situation in Iraq gets tenser and increasingly challenging with protests that I'm sure a lot of you are following. I certainly have been following all day on Twitter and the social media, the latest reports from Baghdad, protests in the streets, people being actually shot at by the security forces, according to some reports. Lots of casualties, hundreds, in fact, reportedly 100 today. So I'd like to start with yourself, Dr. Laith Kubba. I know it's a very difficult situation for the government. However, I would appreciate your take on what is actually happening with these protests. What do they mean?
Thank you. Let me first state the obvious, is that my views are my views. Absolutely. And as an advisor to the Prime Minister, I can differ with his views, but it's more appropriate, I think, to emphasize this point here. It's unfortunate that the moment that Iraq had over the last year, which showed those who visited Baghdad have noticed clearly the improvement in the security atmosphere and the activity taking place in the market. Shops are being opened, people are getting their cash out of the homes, and you can see activity. So there is, you sense real progress. Of course, there is no green zone. Baghdad can breathe, it stays till 2 in the morning. All these are positive signs. But those who look closely at the scene realize that this might not be sustainable on 2 counts. Count 1 is that the budget is overstretched. You can buy your way out, you can pay everybody for a while, but then there is a limit. You will reach a financial crisis, and I think this has been very much on the table in many cabinet meetings. The second factor is, although we have stability and we have, let's say, return of some incidents by Daesh, it doesn't really represent a real threat. Let us not forget that the current prime minister was basically brought to power as a compromise to avoid a violent conflict that could have taken place after the election. The conditions in Iraq when it comes to power are not normal. We have about 10 blocs who have not only armed, let's say, groups under various names. They have banks, they have TV stations, they have members in parliament, and they have real power. And regrettably, with corruption, you'll find the roots of many of those corrupt networks leading or merging with those blocs. So we do have a real problem in the country. And although the best thing we had is that the political process had consolidated, and up until this moment, people refer to the ballot box irrespective of what goes wrong in between. But that's a huge thing. And so long I think we can maintain that, that's a big plus. What we're seeing currently is Iraq has about 20 million young people under the age of 20. Those people are raised with no memory of Saddam Hussein, what went on before, all the political issues. They are not getting the services in schools, in hospitals, or in the streets. They are impatient. In fact, if anything, the current stability and progress that was made in Iraq in the last year has given them the opportunity for the first time, more or less, to demand and vent, be it graduates, be it other political groups. So we're seeing a dynamic. I think so long as it's kept at check without violence, we're okay, it's expected. The challenge that the Prime Minister has with limited time, he is doing his best as a politician to buy time, but his time is under pressure because there are increasing demands. So I will keep my eye on the violence, I'll keep my eye on the budget in Iraq, and the political process, it seems up until now, we're okay with.
Yes, I mean, it is refreshing actually to have seen that the Prime Minister has, at least on social media, from what I could see, expressed concern, but also with also the President of Iraq saying that people have the right to protest. So this is very important that the government is basically not taking a position of these protests should be cracked down on. However, the practice on the ground has been a bit different because we've seen violence happen despite this. And this is leading some people, again, on social media to question how weak or strong is the Iraqi government? How capable is it of actually containing the situation? So with all the good intentions, what's at stake here is the strength of the government.
In the big picture, the biggest challenge facing Iraq is whether it has a state, a strong state, a state that is based on citizenship, or it has a state within a state or multiple states. This is the challenge. And currently the state of Iraq is weak, regrettably I had to say. It's been weakened since 2003 and it hasn't put itself back. It was weak then, but it got weaker. And the challenge is how to rebuild a strong state in Iraq. When people reference, for example, Iran's influence, it's actually a byproduct of the weak state. It's not the cause of the weak state. I think the biggest, let's say, mistake or sin, call it what you like, that happened was to dismantle the state of Iraq following 2003. And since then, Iraq has been struggling in a tough region with tough countries, tough populations, struggling to keep itself together as a state and as a government that has state institutions.
Thank you. I'm going to move to you, Mr. Al-Asadi, to ask, of course, we're now a year away from the elections in which, the political leader you represent, Muqtada Sadr, won more seats than any other. I mean, his bloc won more seats than any other group in parliament. But of course, before that, he had built his legitimacy partly on having been one of the leaders of the protest movement. Right now, we are not seeing much representation on the street for the Sadr movement. I'm just interested, where does your political camp stand in terms of the current protests?
Well, thank you very much. I have to express my great pleasure for speaking to you tonight, and my real sadness for the loss of souls in the streets and among the protesters and those who are wounded. Well, unfortunately, we have all diagnosed that the government, the successive governments of Iraq, lacked certain prerequisites for being effective. I mean, they are described as dysfunctional for so many reasons. And starting from 2012, the Sadr's movement started to follow a route or an approach towards reform. And the reform that we sought is distributed among the different levels of representation in the government. I mean, the different institutions, starting from the judiciary system, then the executive system, then the legislative system. We tried to start with the executive system when Sayyid Muqtada Sadr asked his representative in the government to submit their resignation to the Prime Minister at that time, Dr. Haidar al-Abadi, and they did so in order to give him the freedom to choose a good cabinet, a cabinet that is accountable, because the selection is really it depends on the choice of the Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister is free to choose his cabinet, then he is going to be held accountable if they fail. And that was the problem that no political party could agree with, because most of the political parties realized that their being in the cabinet is one additional point of strength to be added to their being represented in the House of the Representatives. So the Sadr's movement resorted to peaceful demonstrations in the street and try to empower the civic movements in collaboration, of course, with the civic movement, with the Communist Party, and with the secular parties and powers in Iraq. But then we realized that there was also criticism to the Sadr's movement because it was part of the government. And this is a sort of paradox that can never be solved. We cannot be part of the government and criticize the government at the same time. People are asking us, why don't you leave the government since you are not satisfied with the performance of the government? But leaving the government, it means that we are going to give the government the full freedom to do all the mistakes that we were criticizing since the establishment of the Iraqi government in post-2003. Now, we cannot say that the Sadr's movement is not represented in the street and people from the Sadr's movement are not joining the protest movement. They are there. But the protest movement is not represented politically by the Sadrists. It is represented by Iraqi people. And that was the answer of Sayyid Muqtada Sadr to one of the questions raised to him, whether he is going to support directly the protesters or not. He said, all those protesters are Iraqis, and they are calling for the basic services, and they are calling for justice, social justice, equity, and all of these values. So I should support them. But I cannot really support them directly because people will say that there is a bloc representing you in the government. Why not you topple the government, for example, or remove the government? It is a very intricate issue. We cannot really solve. We cannot help being part of the government, but at the same time trying to rectify, trying to correct what is going wrong. Now we believe that, I mean, I was asked frequently since 2016, what kind of protests are there in the streets? I said there are 4 trends. If we take Basra, for example, and analyzed the people who were protesting, there were 4 trends or 4 motives behind people's going into the streets. One of them is those who were calling for basic services and employment and all these basic and necessary human needs. The second one is those people who are malcontent, who are angry with the government, who think that they are not well represented. They were deceived by the political parties, and the political parties usurped the power and claim that they represent them, but in fact they represent just their benefits and their political gains. The third one is the group of intelligentsia, or people who are the elites, so to speak. Those who think that this political system can never be cured, it can never be corrected. So the best thing to do is to remove this political system and establish a new one. Not necessarily by violence, but by pressing on the government in order to change the system. And the fourth one is the group of observers who, this group constitutes the majority of Iraqis, who are not sure whether these protests are led by agendas from inside or outside Iraq, or they are purely representing the needs of Iraqi people. Those people are still suspect about it. If we just follow up what is written in the social media, we will recognize that there are still people accusing those who break into the streets by following certain agendas, either by neighboring countries or superpowers like the United States or other countries. And there are other people who accuse those who do not break into the streets by being cowards, by being unable to defend their rights. So we don't have a movement that has crystallized recently, or a movement that can we see or say that this movement 100% is the representative of the Iraqi people and all their demands. I think the movement of the protest is still being crystallized, it is still being found, and it will come to existence sooner or later if the government continues its performance, and the performance that we just described as dysfunctional, unfortunately.
Right, so again, looking at the latest reports, I'm seeing that the protests have now spread beyond Baghdad. They have spread to Najaf, for example, and other places. What, in your view, you talked about the government, of course, changing its performance, but we all know this takes time. However, immediately, what do you think should be done in order to contain the violence? Because it seems to be, as I said, spreading and growing.
Well, I think most of the people recognize that there are certain indicators or signs if the government is really serious about correcting the situation or correcting itself. One of them is to bring those corrupted people or those who are accused of corruption into accountability, sending them to courts. Nothing has happened, unfortunately, since the first term of Mr. al-Maliki. There were people, senior political leaders who were accused of corruption, but none of them was sent to court. None of them was held accountable in front of Iraqis. This is one of the second one, unfortunately, most of the prime ministers seem also not serious about having a group of proficient advisors on board. Advisors who are really, who can really make difference in economy, for example, in changing the economic philosophy of the country, who are capable of solving educational problem, health problem, who are also capable of identifying or really, setting clearly the political system of Iraq. We all know that the system of Iraq, the political system, is described as decentralized, as a federal system, but on the reality, there is no federalism. There is no federal government in Iraq. The local governments in most of Iraqi parts do not have their authorities that are supposed to have. They are unable to deliver the expected services because they don't have enough authorities, they don't have the legislations, and even if there are legislations, there is overlapping with the national government. I know that this is the case even in most advanced democracies in the world, even in the countries that have been decentralized since maybe the 6th or the 17th century. But the case in Iraq is different. People are, they are desperate to have services. They are desperate to have education and health. If they cannot see any change on the ground, they are not going to be satisfied with the government. So there are certain signs that the Iraqi government, the current Iraqi government, can send to people in order to guarantee that there is change coming, and they are going to make some amendments. Otherwise, I think this will accumulate into social power. And the social power, when it grows, nobody can anticipate or predict what will happen.
Okay, thank you. Moving to yourself, Your Excellency, we've just heard a critique of federalism in Iraq, and of course, this critique that we heard is about all of Iraq. I wonder what's the perspective from Kurdistan on this issue. If you know, we've just heard from Mr. Al-Asadi that there's no real federalism in Iraq. Would you share that perspective? And is this part of the problem that we are seeing with the current government in Iraq?
Thank you very much. I am going to speak in Arabic. Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. In the beginning, I would like to thank the organizers of this panel for inviting me here. I am very sorry about what's happening right now in Iraq and all the protest marches and all the abnormal situation in Iraq. As for the situation in the Kurdistan region, you asked a question about regarding the federalism, if there is real federalism in Iraq or not. In fact, federalism exists by law and by the constitution. However, the implementation of federalism on the ground does not exist. Until now, the government in Baghdad treats the Kurdistan region just like as any other governorate in the in Iraq. It doesn't treat it as a federal region. In the region, we have faced very difficult circumstances in 2014 when there were the Daesh attacked the region. Al-Abadi actually cut the budget for the region just by one signature. If it was a federal system, the Prime Minister wouldn't have been able to cut the budget and the salaries of the people of Kurdistan just by a signature. We went through a very hard time. At that time, the oil prices went down to $20, and we received thousands of refugees from Syria and other Iraqi cities, and we were in a battle with Daesh, and we were selling oil only for $20. So the region now has got lots of debts and faced lots of challenges. We managed to defeat Daesh with the help and the support of our allies, and we managed to get rid of them on the ground militarily. However, the next stage in Iraq is going to be a very difficult one. What we see now is what we are seeing right now are results of what happened in the past. What we need in Iraq, we need some kind of national reconciliation between all the components of the Iraqi people. The Sunni people in Iraq must feel that they are part of Iraq and they are part of the political decision making in Iraq. If we achieve this national reconciliation and everybody in Iraq feels that they are Iraqis, I think that the situation will be completely changed. We also need a roadmap regarding the prices of gas and oil. Can I just ask you a question? You asked about what happened in 2014 when Al-Abadi was the prime minister. Do you think things have changed with the new government and the new prime minister? I'm not talking obviously about the prime minister as an individual, but we have a new government now. Yes, the situation has changed, and a part of the budget started being paid, and salaries are paid, and the relationship with Erbil is very good, and we are hoping that in the near future we are going to reach an agreement between the center and the region. Okay, do you think that the region can play a good role, or a role really, in this national reconciliation that you're talking about? Well, obviously, we know that there are no protest marches in the region, but they're only in other places. Do you think that the region can work as a mediator between all the political parties and lead this national reconciliation, or you're only waiting for Baghdad to do this? Obviously, when we talk about the national reconciliation, it must start from Baghdad. However, the region is always ready to play a role in anything that will bring people together and make the points of views come closer. In many ways, and it happened before, the region received representatives of all the parties. And we were trying to reach an agreement between all the parties. Okay, regarding the accountability, as Mr. Asadi mentioned, I think this is in the heart of the problem now. The Iraqi people are calling for accountability. There is a lot of talk about corruption, and that those who are responsible must be held accountable. Do you fear that in Kurdistan similar things might happen? So, for example, that the people might request accountability in the Kurdistan government? Well, the government in the Kurdistan region has already made a few steps, or have taken few steps, like getting a British company to regulate the oil prices. They also have started a reformation process in many of its departments. It's very normal that things are completely different from between Kurdistan and the rest of Iraq. In Basra, for example, people are struggling. There is no water, and they have no electricity. While in Kurdistan, the situation is completely different. People are receiving all the services that they need, and that's why the situation is very, very different from the rest of Iraq.
Just make maybe one comment to underline something very important you referenced. From 2003, I would say, till 2014-15, although the regime of Saddam Hussein was totally dismantled, but there was a real issue on whether, let's say, the major populations or masses in Iraq have agreed on how to run the country. So, regrettably, the phrase is used, the bloc of Shias, the bloc of Sunnis, the bloc of the Kurds, the three major blocs in the country. But I think from 2014 till 2018, it's worth noting that something very real has changed in Iraq. And then the first one is there was a level of sectarianism very high. And after what Daesh did in Mosul, really the dynamic has changed in all the Western provinces. So today, I think there is a foundation for building a national movement, and the agenda has changed. There is no longer talk about the Shia-Sunni issue, apart from few politicians who want to benefit from it. But the reality is the eyes of the populations, mainly in the Arab population in Iraq, is set on Iraq. And the second most significant, I think, development that happened is Kurdistan tried to have a referendum on independence, and that was very much on the agenda. And that reached a dead end. And I think in Kurdistan also there is a change of heart, a reality that, like it or not, we have to work within Iraq. So those two changes are fundamental. That's the reason the protest we see in Iraq today is not about Shia or Sunni. It's coming from Shia areas as much as from other areas. They are demanding services. They're demanding the return of a state. And of course, corruption is at the heart of it. Mm-hmm. And I regret to say that I mean, we don't want to, we're on record, we can't speak too much on direct political issues, but we do have a real problem with those political groups who are having their grips over money, banks, power, and rooted to corruption. And it's really a problem, and no real answers to it. We need to strengthen a national movement, awareness. You need to mobilize all the marginalized groups that you referenced, Dr. Dia. Then we have a slight change in the political dynamic. My bet is under current political groups, Iraq cannot pull itself out of this quagmire.
So basically, yes, please.
I think deepening the ethno-sectarian differences among Iraqis has always been a political decision. Since 2003, most of the political leaders found that it would be very difficult to get people to rally behind them and elect them without raising the sectarian or ethnic feelings. So now if we bargain on people's awareness that these sensitive issues are going to destroy the social matrix and they are not going to help anymore. And if we also try to prove to the politicians that they can no longer manipulate these differences, I think then we can hope that we will have a coherent society, a society that is capable of overcoming all of the glitches and difficulties that has been facing, and then moving towards development and reforming the political process.
So what I'm hearing, sorry, yes.
I agree with Mr. Dia that in Iraq, those who risked and actually decided to fight the Kurdish people thought that they are going to get more votes in the elections. However, they got disappointed and they have failed in the elections and didn't win the votes that they were hoping for, although they had more votes in the previous elections. So I think that the Iraqi people are going past this point completely.
So what I'm hearing on a positive note is that the old ethno-sectarian divisions are no longer the drivers of strife in Iraq. However, we have, it seems to me, a crucial issue with trust, a crucial issue with accountability, and people perhaps feeling that the government has not delivered, especially after the high hopes that probably were connected with the last parliamentary election. And this happens everywhere, frankly, even here in the UK. You have governments, with coming with certain promises and not necessarily delivering. But to me, the kind of bottom line is something that you said, which is that people want to feel that they are part of the political decision. I think this is a crucial issue. People need to be feeling that they are definitely part of the state in this way. It is also about citizenship, obviously. And this is not something that I think any government can resolve, in a short matter of time. It requires fundamental changes in Iraq. But meanwhile, of course, a lot of people might be worried that the strife that we are seeing today and the kind of lack of trust in the Iraqi state might be exploited by elements such as remnants of ISIS, who might see in this kind of environment entry points for trying to cause more trouble in Iraq, which of course, unfortunately, would take us back into a cycle of violence. I'm hoping that does not happen, but I'm also hoping that the elites that seem to still be in power in Iraq today are able to also see that there is this looming danger that requires a fundamental shift. So let's be cautiously optimistic. I know a lot of you will have things to say about this, but I also want to give space to the audience to ask questions. Please introduce yourselves before you ask the question. Wait for the microphone, especially that the event is being live streamed and also translated. And if you happen to be a Chatham House member, please tell us what else you do in life. Don't just say Chatham House member. Okay, who would like to ask the first question? Yes, at the front, please. I have many questions.
Dr. Jihan Baban, the founder and president of the Iraqi Environment and Health Society, UK. Thank you very much. Very important talk, and we welcome you here. The main causes for current crisis are lacks of services and corruption on massive scales. Water is polluted, air is a high health risk for heart and respiratory condition and cancer. Yet, Iraq, as mentioned, is one of the richest countries in the world.
And your question,
the Iraqi,
please,
I'm going for the question right now.
Very little time. Yeah.
All right. The Iraqi government should introduce tighter environmental regulations. I'm going for the question now. My question is that there are lack of coherent strategy and effective administrative and legal instruments to combat corruption, with two trends emerging. The first trend is to add more layers to manage corruption, such as the Supreme Anti-Corruption Council led by the Prime Minister.
That's not a question. I'm very sorry.
That's
a comment, and we have 20
to,
minutes, and lots of people want to ask questions.
Which one they actually go for it? So
No. Okay, if you don't mind. Your question is basically, I'm going to translate it as, what's the government doing about environmental issues, right? In order to address citizens' concerns? Okay.
The second one is to abolish bureaucracy structure by dissolving all general inspectors posts and diverse work to a specially appointed judge. So which one is you prefer?
Dr. Kubba, you're the representative of the government on the panel, and this is very technical.
I'm not the representative, but I would say I'm the closest to the government. Yeah. That is true. Look, on the issue of the environment, unfortunately, the Minister of Health and Environment resigned, although his resignation is not accepted yet. I spent time with him. He is one of the best and most competent ministers aware, but the question is not about a minister. It's a whole institution. The weakness in Iraq is so structural, it's problematic. So it takes leadership at multiple levels, and it takes time. The challenge the Prime Minister has, he does not have much time. How he uses his time, of course, it's his judgment. He is building, let's say, political capital as time goes by. He's trying to contain as many problems the country has as possible. And regrettably, the environment is not top of the agenda. Only when it causes demonstrations in Basra, it becomes top on the agenda. On the issue of corruption, this is the real challenge. Corruption is so institutionalized in the country, it takes more than cosmetic changes or just forming committees. It actually requires a head-on confrontation. It will come with very high political cost. Whether the Prime Minister is prepared to pay that high cost, I don't know. He has to judge so many factors. But when I look, and corruption is obvious in Iraq, it is institutionalized, regrettably, and it will not go away by just wishing it away. It requires a crackdown. Let us also not forget, between two brackets, one of the causes of the spark, let's say the spark that led to the latest demonstration, is to do with the reassignment of one of the generals in the Iraqi army. But this is let's say, the straw that broke the camel's back. It's on top of many, many issues, but corruption is very, very high on the agenda.
Thank you. And I have to say also thank you. You're a regular participant in our Iraq events, and you always raise the issue of the environment. And I know a lot of people used to dismiss that until the protests in Basra started and people started to actually realize what a catastrophe the environmental crisis there is. So thank you. I have many hands. Yes, gentlemen in the back. Thanks. And please be brief, just to give others the opportunity.
Naji Sultan, I am a journalist. I have two questions quickly. to Mr. Al-Assadi first. Wouldn't it be better to say that reconciliation should happen between all the parties and the political movements, not between the people, because the people really don't have any problems between themselves? And to Mr. Karim Sinjari, you started your talk by saying that the Iraqi government is treating the region until now as if it's a small one of the governorates. I think this is very unfair. Can Basra now export 1 barrel of oil and obviously the region exports something around 4 million barrels every single day? Thank you very much.
I agree with you 100% because we were approached by the UN group in Iraq, UN office, and some of the political leaders in order to involve us in the process of national reconciliation. We actually refused to join this proposal. We said that there must be reconciliation, not on the political level. I mean, political level or political leaders do not have any problem. They fight today and they become friends the other day. So the best thing to do is to establish coherence among social components of the Iraqi society, to get the reconciliation or to get the matrix, the social matrix repaired. Because in post-2003, there were so many problems among the different components of Iraqi society. Then we have to start with social reconciliation. That's why we haven't joined this proposal, and we said that there's a longer process to go with, and the political parties, the existing political parties now may not succeed in the upcoming elections. They may leave sooner or later. We need to work with the people on the level of social level, on the social level rather than on the political level. I mean, that's why I agree with you that it should start with the social level, not with the political level.
Regarding the oil, my dear brother, we have tried with Baghdad and we have studied a regulation about oil and gas, and we agreed a draft bill. Unfortunately, it wasn't passed and it wasn't signed. This agreement was about on the 2nd month, and they said if the bill is not passed, you can start exporting the oil. And we waited until May, actually. So we waited for 3 months to pass this bill. And also, we were forced because we were attacked by Daesh. So we were forced to sell the oil so that we can survive. But right now, the situation is a bit different. As for the Peshmerga existed since 1961. Peshmerga was part of the Iraqi constitution, as part of the Iraqi forces, and they were called as the region's guards. It has always existed, and we have tried with the Malki's government to form units of Peshmerga, and unfortunately that was not approved by the government. So do you want me to cancel Peshmerga completely? No, I can't do that. Peshmerga didn't receive a single penny from the central government for its budget. In the Mosul war, we have fought Daesh with the Iraqi military, and Abadi, the prime minister, decided to give 15 billion dinar to Peshmerga as help, but that was not paid. He made the decision, but that was never paid until now. That was listed in the budget as part of the Peshmerga salaries, but that was never paid to them until now.
I know there's many hands. I want to use my chair's prerogative and ask about the elephant in the room before we move on, because I think a lot of what you're saying is leading me to think about this, which is the role of regional and external powers, especially in the current climate. Because it seems to me, unfortunately, the kind of negative kind of vibe that I'm getting is a sense of not complete lack of ownership of the Iraqi file by different Iraqi entities, including the leaders, which leads me to ask about the role of Iran, especially the standoff with the United States, with Iraq finding itself in the middle, sometimes being asked to mediate, with Saudi Arabia at one point trying to reach out to certain political leaders in Iran, then similar leaders, kind of trying to also not be in Iran's kind of, on the hit list, so to speak. So it's a very delicate situation, and Iraq is finding itself in the middle of this storm. So you mentioned this, Dr. Kuba, at the beginning, that the weakness of Iraq is what in a way, brought Iran into the fold rather than the other way around. So we're not saying Iraq is completely powerless in this. So what to do about this situation, and where are we heading?
Can I?
Yes.
Let's just zoom out for 10 years and have a look, 10, 15 years. Pre-2003, the problem has been in the region that Iraq was too strong under Saddam Hussein. It's threatening its neighbors. It had a war with Iran. It invaded Kuwait. It had whatever in Kurdistan. So it was a big, big problem and a big worry. So everybody gathered to say not only remove Saddam Hussein as a cause, but Iraq needs to be scaled down a bit, regrettably. And I say it because from an Iraqi point of view, I make a clear distinction between a bad ruler, Saddam Hussein, and a strong state, which everybody wants. So the dismantling and the scaling down of Iraq through some articles in the constitution as well as through the structural institution had left Iraq exposed. Iraq today does not govern totally its borders, its land, and it's even its budget. Mm-hmm. Of course, we have a government in place, but we all know, I mean, the big elephant in the room is that the government of Iraq is under influences. Historically, it has always been under influences, but in the 21st century, we expect we're a sovereign state. As a sovereign state, it has full control over its borders and over its affairs. Of course, if it is too weak and cannot control all the entries, then we have a problem. And the strategy is not to blame neighbors. I think the strategy, the counter strategy should be Iraq must rebuild its state institutions. And if there are friends of Iraq, they ought to help Iraq in that respect. To me, the measuring scale here is that any country that helps build the state of Iraq is a friend. Any country that weakens the state of Iraq is an enemy of the state of Iraq. And we need to rebuild the state of Iraq. That's what we should do.
The issue, though, is that none of the regional or external actors are in either category 100%, as far as I can see, because sometimes there are well-meaning things that may, be given to Iraq by an external entity that end up, not necessarily achieving their objectives, but opening the door to other problems. So, Mr. Al-Asadi, if you don't mind, what do you think Iraq should do vis-a-vis the United States and Iran? Because obviously it needs to have good relations with both for obvious reasons. However, it's now kind of stuck in the middle.
Well, I think we all know that the Sadr's movement has expressed its position as to the American occupation of Iraq in post-2003. We were opposing Saddam's regime in the 1990s. We wanted Saddam regime to be removed, but not the way the Americans did. So, I mean, by the very definition, the Americans were occupiers of Iraq, and we stood against the occupiers. We believe that the United States gave all the justifications, all the reasons that Iran wanted in order to interfere in the Iraqi business. Now Iran said that the Americans are here in order to change the Iranian regime, so why not we fight for our own regime? The extremists in the Arab land, including those who come from the Gulf states and elsewhere, they say Iraq is an occupied country, so we have to go and free Iraq from the United States. And ironically, they're very countries where the place where from the Americans came to Iraq, and they say we have to go to Iraq in order to oust the Americans out from Iraq. Now we believe that neither the American policies in Iraq nor the Iranian policies are helping the Iraqi people. In order to get a sovereign Iraq and a stable Iraq, we have to cut all the intervention in the Iraqi business. And we have to establish balanced relationships between Iraq and its neighbors. Without these balanced relationships, because Turkey would like to interfere in Iraq, it has all the reasons, and including the PKK and other reasons. The Turkmen in Iraq, it will say that we would like to protect the Turkmen in Iraq and their rights. The Arab countries will say, look, the Sunnis are minority now in Iraq, and they are going to be hegemonized, they are going to be suppressed by the Shia, so we need to protect them. Iran would say that the Shia regime is under threat, it is vulnerable, so we have to protect it. And all these justifications are not helping the successive Iraqi governments to keep Iraq intact of any intervention. So, I mean, without changing the American international policies in the Middle East, without changing the Iranian international relations or foreign relations in the Middle East, Iraq is not going to be stable. And this is clear to everybody, I think.
Okay, so we're talking about balance. So all the outreach that we're seeing by different politicians is about balance rather than about seeking patronage. Okay, back to the audience. Many hands. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Lina. I have a question to...
introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Omar Mohammed, a historian from Mosul. I will speak in Arabic to Mr. Sinjari.
The question is to Mr. Sinjari. You said that the Kurdistan has got problems with the central government. Why can't Kurdistan make an initiative by holding accountable the governor of Mosul, the former governor of Mosul, why don't you hand him in? If we are treating, or you are treated as just any Iraqi governorate, then why are you protecting this person who is wanted in Iraq and according to the American terrorist list? Nawfal Al-Aju, who is obviously wanted, does not live in Kurdistan. He lives now in one of the Iraqi governorates, and he doesn't live in Kurdistan.
Okay. Other questions? I'm trying to think who was first. Yes, sir.
Andrew England from the Financial Times. Dr. Cooper, you mentioned General Sadi and his removal from counterintelligence to counterterrorism to the Defence Ministry, and you said it was a straw that broke the camel's back. Why did it happen, and why should that be a catalyst? And you also mentioned the weakness of the political system because of the political system. So how much control, how much power does the Prime Minister actually have in terms of the day-to-day running of the government and how it deals with situations like we see now in Iraq with the protests? Thank you.
On the second point, I mean, as much as I can see, I attend the cabinet meeting once a week, and I watch things from a distance, not that close. But the Prime Minister is really a skilled politician. And it's a very tough position when you're trying to please everybody. You're trying to please Iran and America at the same time. You're trying to please let's say, Turkey and the regional government in Kurdistan. There are many, many factors that the Prime Minister needs to balance. So it's very tough. But as a general picture, I can say the toughest one has been the one to do with the Al-Hashd, the popular mobilizing forces, and the containing them by first making them part of the national forces in Iraq, and then by trying to merge them with the Ministry of Defense. This is a very tough call because the Hashd, they're irregular forces, they haven't been trained or disciplined. Some of them have loyalties outside Iraq. I mean, some, very small fraction, not the majority. And it's a tough one. Some of them are known to have very close associations with Iran. And still, they have to be integrated. So in the midst of that, and there were couple of other incidents, there were some counter statements coming from some, let's say, generals in the Hashd that contradicted the policy of the government, and there has been clarification about it. In the midst of that atmosphere, the assignment or reassignment of General Abdul-Wahab al-Saadi came. So I think there is a lot of apprehension. Why is it happening? Is that a shift in officers? Who is controlling what? So that added to the charged atmosphere that existed. That's an explanation that I can give from just being an observer.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please. There, yeah.
Thank you. Ali Al-Maulawi from the Bayan Center. I'd like to ask a question about job creation. So it's clear that rising youth unemployment is a big factor amongst disaffected youth who are joining the protest movement. The Prime Minister recently announced plans to absorb more graduates into the public sector. And the previous Prime Minister also had a similar approach to the Basra protests. The question is, how realistic is it for the government to continue to grow the public sector, to absorb tens of thousands of young people, particularly given the budgetary constraints? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's another one for you.
There has been initiatives that did not work. There was about $4 billion which were supposed to go out in small loans. They couldn't process them because there was no capacity, not only at the banks, but at the recipient end. Nobody was showing young people how to start up anything. So this didn't work. Recently, the Prime Minister initiated another scheme by which they're distributing small pieces of land with government guaranteed loan to start reconstruction. Reconstruction is always a good way to kickstart employment. There has been a success when it came to agriculture this year when the government gave a guarantee to buy all the products. And actually, Iraq, for the first time, had surplus in its agricultural products in wheat. So all these are taking place, but the gap is growing bigger and the government is not catching up. There are other schemes. I happen to be closely supervising one of them. There are other schemes. But again, the politics of it, can it be done in time to please those young graduates and others? I don't know. It's pointless to try to give public employment. The government is so overloaded. They need something more fundamental. That's the reason I said the challenge on the budget is really, it's unsustainable. Some interventions are needed there.
Okay, yes.
Okay. Regarding unemployment, I think it's the most important point is to encourage the private sector and to attract investors and to start building factories. And I think this is going to help in ending unemployment.
Thank you so much. And actually, it's 7 p.m. I know a lot of you had questions. However, we have a reception upstairs. So I hope you can take advantage of that to have discussions that we were not able to cover in this hour. Of course, yes, absolutely. And do come to the conference tomorrow. We have more very rich discussions. And for now, just please join me in thanking our high-level guests for this very frank discussion. Thank you.